Welcome to the Cheerful Soundman podcast. I'm Eric Linus-Bunt, the Cheerful Soundman, here at Vivid Sky Productions, based in Gainesville and Tallahassee, Florida. We talk about events, live events, working in the events industry, and everything related to production and events. So today's topic, we're going to talk about the nuances and specifics of corporate or social events. So this is from both a production and a planning side of things. Let's give a little bit of background. You probably, if you're listening to this, know the difference, but there's several different types of events. I was going through this with our marketing folks the other day too, of our different audiences, and this kind of got me thinking about this too. For us as a company, it depends on the company too, but for us as a company, we do music festivals. So we come out and we bring out large setups and lots of speakers, LED walls, everything, and then a bunch of artists you've heard of come and play music. It's awesome, fun. Total musical experience, think Bonnaroo or something, right? But not necessarily, we don't do Bonnaroo, but things like that. But then you have one-off concerts as well. So you go to an arena or an amphitheater or maybe a field outside, right? That's a category. But then you start getting into these other types of special events. And a lot of times because the concerts and festivals are kind of the sexy, fun ones that everyone wants to get into, we don't necessarily notice that there's actually way more work in some of these other genres. And one of them is corporate and social. So corporate would be your meetings, conferences, things like that. And your social is going to be like weddings. What other type of parties would there be? We do bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, anniversary parties, things like that. A lot of times that happens in more wealthy areas, because they throw bigger parties and spend more money on production and things like that. A friend of mine recently just hit me up about he's doing some work for a private party at the Masters, the golf tournament in Augusta. Very fancy, highfalutin, fun stuff. We're about doing a deck over a pool, and they're having a whole setup over top of the pool. So the performers and the audience, the dance floor will be over the pool. So again, quite a variety of different things that you can do in the corporate and social world. The big difference is, and this is kind of for my techs and people listening that have not really worked those type of events, the big differences in those is it's a lot like, it's exactly what it sounds like, a corporate job. So if you're, I kind of walk the line a little bit here. If you could see the lower half, so I'm like a mullet, like a walking mullet. I got like a party going on down here with my sweatpants. You can't see them, and a nice, collared shirt up top. But you got to go to the collared shirt. That's kind of the big first thing is corporate and social both. A lot of it is, most of it is honestly about appearance. And that's your appearance as a tech or as an employee or as a person, as well as the appearance of the things that you're presenting or using. So that's early on. I made these mistakes 15 years ago or so, brought out some stuff that was more, I would say, rock and roll gear. It was a little more, had been on the road a bit and things like that, not as refined, not as clean, to a wedding event. And it really stood out. Nobody even said anything to me, but I quickly noticed, I was like, ooh. And when I got some black spray paint and started just dusting some things with spray paint and touching them up, when you think about either a corporate or a social event, we do corporate events sometimes at the Rose in Shingle Creek, very nice hotel in Orlando, big convention hall. Everything's very nice there, marble floors and like everything, lots of attention to detail throughout the entire facility, throughout this multi-million, probably $100 million giant hotel facility. And they have a lot of people, any given time you walk up and there's 10 people grooming the bushes outside and picking up trash and doing all those things. So there's a lot of attention to detail. And I am a big believer in trying to give that attention to detail to every project, but especially when you're on a corporate or a social type of event. There's a lot less room for forgiveness on those things. If I'm at a concert, nobody's sitting there looking at like, oh, that case, has some scuffs and marks on it, right? Nobody cares. They're there, it's an experience, and sometimes it's even part of the look and the vibe is the industrial look and things like that. But when you're in that corporate environment, they think about this. If I'm working for American Express for an event, they're holding an event, and they've got various speakers, they're talking about sales, quarterly sales, and this and that, then they're presenting awards maybe to their employees or whatever. These things could be a lot of different things, but let's say they're doing all that. If I go into American Express's offices, what do they look like? They're clean. They have janitorial services. They have nice new floors. The walls aren't scuffed up and worn out. So we have to present ourselves as event professionals in that same way. And so that means making sure everything's clean or covered. So a lot of black fabric is used. A lot of just covering things go. The Breakers in Palm Beach, very high-end hotel as well, very famous one, right on the beach. Beautiful, fantastic ballroom. The whole side of it is these giant, 20-foot glass windows the whole way looking out at the beach. And, this is where very high-end events happen, whether it's, the one percenters getting married, or political events or donor events or nonprofit, very high dollar, $100,000 to buy a table that's, then contributing to this nonprofit, very high-end stuff. So there, I notice almost anytime I've been there, when we put the lighting truss up, they have the decor team come in and they'll actually dress the truss up top. And if you think about it, you kind of think about it, you're looking at it as like, who's really staring up at the lights in the ceiling? Like, that's kind of a weird thing to do. But when you don't do something like that and the rest of the room is immaculate, and then you look up and you see lights and you see the wires and things, even if you dress them neatly and all that, there is a distinct difference in the feel of the event. And most people understand that and have been to, if you've been to a fancy restaurant, kind of the same thing, right? There's differences. If you go to a Chili's, it's not going to be, the same attention to detail at every booth and table and everything else. Now, they still have their protocols and they still do things well, but they're expecting you to bring in your 3 kids, and the kids are going to crawl all under the table and throw the coasters all over the place and spill the ketchup and everything else. In a high-end restaurant, you have, gorgeous tablecloths and everything, the silverware, everything is put out with a great attention to detail. And that is kind of one of that's the comparison really from concert work and event festival type of work to the corporate and social world, is you have to treat it that way. You're the high-end restaurant at that point. And if you think about it, a lot of times the high-end restaurant, now good ones, there's, a chef that really makes a difference. Some of the ingredients are more expensive, but for the most part, a lot of times a steak here is very similar to a steak here. I've had some pretty dang good steak at like Texas Roadhouse and Longhorns and those, right? I've had better steaks at the $500 steakhouse meal. But honestly, at the end of the day, the product itself isn't too crazy far off. It's the presentation and the attention to detail that makes all the difference. And that's really what it comes down to in the event and corporate world. So it starts with you. It starts with your team, your people, long black pants, tucked in polo shirt or long black sleeves. Sometimes you'll wear your branding, sometimes you won't. All that's show dependent, et cetera. But that attention to detail, how you roll into the venue with your equipment. Are your things all packed neatly? Are your cases wiped down, or did they just come from an outdoor festival and they're covered in dirt and sand and, dragging sand through the building? Is it something that you could take into a carpeted, beautiful ballroom and not tick off the housekeeping staff because you just made things messy or sloppy? Bringing lots of dress kits, fabrics, things like that. We use tech drape around our booth as well in these type of environments. We don't do that at a concert. We don't put black drape, a half wall of black drape around our consoles at a concert because everybody just knows there's consoles there. We're here for music. We're here for concerts. But in that environment, we want that to blend in and look like there is no AV there. And all I want to see on the table ultimately is the mixing console. And I don't want to see any, the cables need to be extremely clean coming off the back of it. I don't want any rat's nest of cables behind it. And then I want my laptop there that's doing the playback for the video, let's say, with one cable, that's necessary going to it. And that's it. Not a bunch of extra gack. I don't want cases laying around. We're going to store all our deads in, all our empty cases, things like that in another room completely. Or if they do have to be in the same room behind the drape line, there's lots of pipe and drape used. And all of that is to elevate that experience. Again, much like a high-end restaurant, it's that difference between coming in and you can see everything and you can see the behind the scenes versus I'm just getting this very clean look. So for those of you in the event industry, I would say pay attention to those things next time you're at one of those events, or even watching one on a stream or on TV. If you go to a Tony Robbins event or something like that, they've got all the massive video walls and everything else, and it's almost like a concert vibe, but it's still that extremely clean, polished look across the board. The second thing is knowing who your principal is either in the corporate or the social. And what I mean by that is not the principal of the school, but the principal person that you're serving. So again, I said Tony Robbins. I'll just stick with that since I just threw that off the cuff. But let's say you have a speaker like that and it's their conference, they're the main event. It's really understanding that and getting them set up, working with their team to set them up if they're a higher end person or a very important VIP person like that, or a politician or anything like that. You work with their team, but it's also having backups and fail safes. And so when we did events for the president, for instance, so we did a couple of events for Biden and we've done some events for Trump. When we run cables to the podium, let's say, to the lectern with the multiple mics, seal of the United States of America on the front, all super important. There are 2 lines to run those mics. There's actually 4 lines under that stage. We have 2 backup lines. It would be an insane world where both of those lines failed, but we have them ready to go. And there's no scenario where we cannot have that swapped over in an instant. On top of that, not that particular one, but in other events, if somebody has a wireless mic, we have an additional spare wireless on a completely different frequency, as well as wired backups. So it's all about having no dropout in time, because what you don't want is somebody up there in the middle of their big speech or their sales pitch. A lot of these are sales pitches as well, right? I'm up here, and if this pitch goes well, so if you talk about info marketing or one of those type of corporate events, if the pitch goes well, there could quite literally be millions of dollars flowing through that room by the end of the day in contracts and different business that's done. The last thing that you want is a microphone dropping out and then throwing that person off their game, because that does a lot to a speaker as well. They're in the flow. I got everybody captivated. I'm about to, close them, about to do my big call to action, come sign up for our thing. And then on the microphone. And then it just stops the energy and the momentum in its tracks. It shifts all the attention that you don't want back to you as the technician. What's going on? Technical difficulties. We've all seen it. We've all experienced it. Literally everybody in the world has experienced this at some point at events or even on television, things like that. The last thing you want is to break the flow of the principal or the main program that's happening. So that's why having a backup, having someone ready for that too. So, typically it's your A2 or the stage manager on the side of the stage, and they're ready to go with the backup. There's no hesitation. And truthfully, especially with corporate events, when you have an important speaker on stage, nobody should be relaxed until that person walks off the stage. Somebody should be every moment eyes on them. And that's a big thing I teach. Same with, and this applies to the concert world too. I've always told monitor engineers this as well, because you're serving the band and the performer. And so for a monitor engineer to be locked in, eyes up the whole time. If I do have to come in and adjust something and look down, I'm back eyes up again, looking around, scanning my band, making sure my drummer's not trying to wave a stick at me and go, hey, whoa, my ears went out, I can't hear anything. Because that's the last thing you want as well. So it's much like that in the music side, but it's making sure you understand who your principal is, who you're really serving, because then when you serve that artist, performer, or speaker, that is actually then serving the thousands of people that are watching. And that is your mission critical, your mission as a whole, to ensure that they're well taken care of. And then the big one, I probably should have started with this, but the big one is planning and pre-planning. We have found there are a lot of great event planners in the social world, and there are also a lot of really not great or inexperienced planners in the social world. And a lot of times they get the gig because they know somebody, or maybe they're good at one particular thing. Maybe they're great at floral, but they're not necessarily great at all the planning, but they still sell it as we do all the planning. So we've had great experiences with some planners. We work with Merge event groups here in Gainesville a lot. We work with John Gandy events in Tallahassee a lot. Both of those are very well organized, very well run operations that get us all the information we're going to need. However, there's several other folks, and I won't name any names, there's several other planners that we've worked with, organizers that we've worked with that they just don't have as much experience and their processes aren't as good. So they're not going to have every question answered for you already. So a lot of it is we have our checklist of information we need to know, things we need to know. And a lot of times it shouldn't fall back to us in these instances, but it does fall back to us. And we have to really seek the information and almost educate the event planner as well on the information they need to get. It does seem consistently that power is always the thing that everybody forgets about, whether it's the client, whether it's the event planner, or whether it's the production company. Everybody always forgets the power, even though it's really the most important thing. I think we've talked about this on the podcast before, but if you don't have power to plug your gear in, or it's not enough, right? So it all worked fine during sound check, but now that, we actually turned everything on and are going full tilt and there's audience here, now we're pulling too much amperage and we're blowing it all up. So that happens more times than you can imagine. Also, especially on the smaller scale, when I'm in a ballroom, again, like Rose and Shingle Creek, they usually have big power connection because that's what they do. They do events all the time. They're also more organized. They usually have in-house planners, things like that. But if I'm going to, the Women's Club here in Gainesville, which is a 150 seat venue, they have maybe 4 circuits through the whole building. So that also informs me and tells me I can't sell them a giant LED wall and all these other things, right? I can't do all that requires all this power unless we also educate them and request we park a generator outside, and then we've got to run cables through the door. But all of that is planning as well, because how can I get the cables from outside to inside without propping? We don't want to prop all the doors open and things like that. So it all comes down to planning and preparation. Again, sometimes you'll get a great planner. I would say more often than not, though, we get somebody, especially in the corporate world as well, we get somebody who maybe they're the marketing person and their actual core competency is marketing, but now they've been asked to plan this event. And in fairness to them, they don't necessarily know all the things they have to think about because it might be their first time ever planning an event, or maybe they helped on the last one but didn't do it all. And so now they're thinking about everything from making sure they got enough hotel rooms booked, in their room block, to making sure catering's right, to make sure there's coffee urns every hour on the hour or whatever, all the other things that go with planning a corporate event. And so that's where we come in and we find it really important to, if we recognize that we don't have somebody that's experienced in that, and maybe there's a few red flags of like, oh, they can't give us this information, or they were surprised we even asked about power, things like that, then that's where we kind of step in, and this is at least our philosophy as a company, is we step in and help try to guide that conversation. Hey, here's the list of things we really need to know. Is it possible to meet you on site, or let's hop on a Zoom call and go over everything so we make sure we suss out all details that are needed. So that's the big thing, is pre-planning and going through that checklist and what's needed to get the job done. So yeah, those are the 3 main things that I have today for success in corporate and social events. And then lastly is perform to the best of your ability, be sober, have plenty of caffeine, be ready to go, and be ready for long hours of sitting there like this, just ready, staring, waiting, turning a microphone up and down. And then the last bit, and this is for the sound people out there, the last bit is volume is always a thing, so up and down. However, what's more important than anything, especially in the corporate world, is that the mics are on and the mics are off when they're supposed to be. You can adjust and you can work your gain and your volume and your EQs to all try to inch a little bit more volume out of it. But the very most important thing, this also goes for theater, it goes for really every genre, but especially in this corporate world. Having the microphone on when you see the person walk on stage, you don't want them to start talking and then have to start again because the microphone wasn't on. And conversely, you don't want them to walk off stage and say, man, that audience sucked today, and it coming over the PA. or whatever else people might say, right? We've all heard horror stories of somebody forgetting to mute the lav and they're going to the bathroom and the whole place can hear them going to the bathroom. I was at a church once where that actually happened while I was there. And I was like, this is hilarious. I can hear the pastor peeing and asking whoever else was in the bathroom with him how the sermon was. And I can hear it over the PA. This is amazing. Behind the scenes, true behind the scenes footage. But anyway, my main point is the microphone, even if it could be louder, needs to be adjusted, on and not feeding back. On and not feeding back. Those are kind of the main things. So if you start to get that feedback, make it quieter. I would rather have a quiet mic than a feeding back mic. And then we start to work the techniques on the audio side to get that up, back to where we need it. And then sometimes I'll add that. That's another thing, and especially in the corporate and social world, is these are not seasoned performers a lot of times. Sometimes the principal will be, right? They've spoken on a lot of stages. They know the deal. They know where to pin their mic, all that. But a lot of times they don't. And so that's why if you're pinning a mic on somebody, we pin it on them. We don't ever let them pin it on themselves. They're not going to put it in the right spot. They're not going to angle it right. So we come up respectfully, pin it on them, make sure it's correct. We give information, like if somebody's doing a handheld, hey, I want it about a fist away at most from your chin. So if you were to put this here, so no more than a couple inches from your mouth at the most. And I've been known to jump up and down and wave and tell them, Mike, bring the mic up, from the back of the room. I'm giving hand signals like, Mike, closer to your mouth and things like that. So not everybody's going to be experienced. So it's also politely and respectfully and proactively coaching them. So when you hand them the mic, tell them what you expect. We don't assume that they know. And maybe they'll say, we do get it sometimes. I'll be explaining like, okay, so I want it here and this and that with the mic. And they'll go, oh, I've done this a million times. I got you. Does this look good? And I go, yep, perfect. You got it. All right. So sometimes we do get those folks, but a lot of times in that world, we don't. It's, again, these are people who work for a corporation that, they're all about selling manufactured products, not standing up and speaking in front of a crowd. So trying to make them as comfortable and prepared as possible and help them succeed as well. And that's what it really comes down to.